Hilchos Maachalos Asuros Perek Tashi, the laws of forbidden foods, chapter 9. This is an exciting chapter because it's all about basar b'chalav, the prohibition of mixing milk and meat. Super common, relevant very much today, and it's the subject that pretty much every yeshiva student studies as part of smicha, part of receiving ordination. You learn the Shulchan Aruch.
Heschel just wrote the exam.
Yes, Heschel's doing the exam. My brother's doing smicha right now.
You're doing it as
Yeah,
well.
so
Meat and milk.
he's here to correct anything I say. Because like the other chapter also with the Rambam, every halacha or two in the Rambam becomes a full siman, a full chapter in the Shulchan Aruch. So what we're learning today in one chapter becomes pages and pages and pages in the Shulchan Aruch. So there's so much more detail than what we're going to learn today. And plus, we're only getting one opinion, the Rambam's opinion. There are other opinions on many matters, especially as it relates to practical halacha today. So take everything we say today a little bit with a grain of salt. In other words, in the knowledge that some of it may be adjusted as you move to the field of practical halacha. And I'm going to try my best to insert the comments that are relevant practically, and help me out if I forget anything. But either way, the main context is going to be the Rambam. So we're studying the Rambam, and in light of that, we're going to have some halachic comments as well. So the Rambam begins, and he says, Halacha Aleph, Basar b'chalav, asr levashloi. Meat in milk is forbidden to be cooked. That's the primary prohibition. The primary prohibition is not to cook milk and meat together. V'asr le'achloi min haTorah. It's also biblically forbidden to eat a cooked mixture of milk and meat. We're going to soon see in a second. There's no prohibition biblically to eat dry meat and dry milk that you mix together. It has to be cooked together in order for it to be biblically forbidden to be eaten.
That's not meat. You can eat.
No, you can't do it rabbinically. Rabbinically, you cannot do it. I'm just saying biblically, the biblical prohibition is to eat meat and milk that were cooked together. V'asr b'hana. This is one of those extreme prohibitions where if the prohibition is created, it's forbidden to derive any benefit from it. Somebody cooked meat and milk together, the koiver, so you have to bury it. The efrei asur ke'efra kol hanikbarim. If you burn it, the ashes are forbidden to have benefit from, like the ashes of anything that has to be buried. Any sacrifice that has to be buried, many things in halacha have to be buried so that you don't derive any benefit from them. That's how forbidden they are. If you burn them, the ashes also is forbidden to be used. If any Jew cooks a mixture of meat and milk, that's a total of an olive size. You don't have to have an olive size of meat and an olive size of milk. You just need to, together it should be an olive size. And you cooked it, loike, you get lashes. Shanemar, as it says, and this is a verse that actually appears 3 times in the Torah, Loi sevashel gedi b'chalevi mai. You shall not cook a goat, a meat of a kid goat in its mother's milk. You see it on the screen 3 times in the Torah. Actually, in this week's Parsha.
The Karaim is following only that.
Huh?
The Karaim.
Yeah, we'll soon talk about it. But in this week's Parsha, it says, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. It's also in a couple of weeks' Parshas, and in the end of the Torah in Dvarim, 3 times it's repeated.
This is the
Biblical prohibition, cooking meat and milk. Same thing if a Jew eats an olive-sized portion of a mixture of the 2 things, meat and milk. For meat and milk that were cooked together, you see again, the Rambam describes the prohibition only being if the meat and the milk were cooked together, then you ate it, like you get lashes, even though you weren't the one who cooked it. Even if it was a Gentile that cooked the meat and the milk. So he was allowed to cook it, but then you eat it, you get lashes. Halacha Beis, the Rambam says, if you look in the verse, all you see is a prohibition against cooking. Each time it says, Lo tevashel gedi. You cannot cook the meat in its mother's milk. Why didn't the Torah say clearly you can't eat it? If it's forbidden biblically, we would expect somewhere in the Torah it should say you can't eat meat and milk. Says the Rambam, Leishasa kakosuf, mileser ha'achila. The only reason Torah was quiet and did not explicitly forbid eating meat and milk, elo mipnei she'asar abishol, is because it already forbade the cooking. If the cooking is forbidden, so certainly the eating is forbidden. This is a fascinating Rambam and attracted the attention of many commentaries because in the Midrash and the Gemara, the Rambam himself writes elsewhere that the reason that it's forbidden to be eaten is because there's an extra verse. The verse actually says you cannot cook it 3 times. So one of them is the prohibition of cooking. One of them is the prohibition of eating. And the only reason it says cooking is because you can't eat it when it's cooked. But the Rambam here seems to imply that no, the Torah was actually quiet. The Torah didn't, The third one is for benefit. Can't have benefit from it. But the Rambam over here seems to imply that the Torah is actually not referring to eating at all. It's just meant to be understood from the fact that it's forbidding cooking. Kiloymar, this means to say, Va'afilu bishulei asur ve'ein tzarich leimar achilasei. Torah is telling us even cooking is forbidden. So certainly eating. Kimoi, and we actually find this elsewhere, like shashasak mileser habas me'achar sha'asar bas habas. In the beginning of this book, the Rambam told us that it's biblically forbidden to have relations with your daughter, even though if you open up the entire Torah, you won't find anywhere it doesn't say for relationship with your daughter is forbidden. But it does say it's forbidden to marry your daughter's daughter. So if your daughter's daughter is forbidden, certainly your own daughter is forbidden. So hence the Torah, all it has to say is you can't cook meat and milk, and it's also included eating meat and milk that are cooked together. Now let's go to the definition of meat and milk. Because if you look in the verse, all it says is a goat and its mother's milk. So the Rambam says, Ein asur min ha-Torah. Biblically, the only meat and milk that are forbidden is ela bisar behema tahira, b'chalev behema tahira. The meat of a kosher domesticated animal, which means an ox, a goat, or a sheep, in the milk of a kosher domesticated animal, again, an ox, a goat, or a sheep. Shanemar, how do we know this? Because it says, Lo yisavashel gedi b'chalev imay. You shall not cook a kid goat in its mother's milk. Ugdi, in the Torah, the word gedi, although we translate it as a kid goat, actually the word gedi, hu koilo vlad hasher, vlad haseh, vlad ha'ez. Gedi means a kid animal, not a kid goat specifically. The word gedi means baby, young.
Yeah.
Young of any of the kosher animal types, ox, goat, or sheep. Ad sheyifret v'yoymar gedi izim. Unless Torah specifies and uses an extra word which is gedi izim. Gedi izim, that means a kid goat specifically. But otherwise, the word gedi means a young vlad, a baby cow, a baby goat, a baby sheep. So already the word gedi includes all types of kosher domesticated animals. The only reason Torah says you cannot cook a goat in its mother's milk is because Torah speaks of the common case. But really, any meat, any milk of a kosher animal is forbidden. But only that. Aval basar behema tahira, b'chalev behema tameya. Ay basar behema tameya, b'chalev behema tahira. But if one of the products involved is the product of a non-kosher species, you cook horse meat in cow milk, or horse milk with cow meat. Mutar levashel, umutar bahana. It's permitted to cook such a mixture. It's permitted to have benefit from such a mixture. Ve'ein chayavin ala chilasei mishum basar b'chalav. Even when you eat it, you're not liable for the mixture of meat and milk. Of course, you're liable for eating non-kosher meat or non-kosher milk. That's a separate issue. But the creation of basar b'chalav can only happen through kosher species meat and kosher species milk. Halacha daled v'chein basar chaya v'oif. Similarly, the meat of a chaya, a beast, a deer, a gazelle, even though it's kosher, and a bird also, even though it's kosher, bein b'chalev chaya, bein b'chalev behema. Whether you cook it in the milk of another beast or the milk of a kosher domesticated animal. So deer meat in cow milk, let's say, chicken in cow milk, is not biblically forbidden to be eaten. Lefichach, because it's not biblically forbidden to be eaten, mutar levashlo or mutar bahana. According to the Rambam, it's permitted to cook chicken and milk, it's permitted to cook deer meat and milk, it's permitted to have benefit from such mixtures. The asur ba'achila midivrei seifrim. It's only forbidden to be eaten rabbinically. Kedei shalo yifshu ha'am, so that people shouldn't come to commit a sin, and they may end up eating or come to a prohibition of biblically prohibited meat and milk. They're going to end up eating kosher meat, domesticated animal meat, with kosher milk. Why? Because if you're going to say, hey, you can eat deer meat in milk because it's not included in the literal verse. So they're going to go, okay, let's take the actual literal verse. The actual literal verse says only a kid in its mother's milk. Maybe any other meat and milk is also kosher. So as a safeguard, the sages said, Lefichach asru kol basar v'chalav. Any meat in any milk as long as it's within the kosher species, of course, is forbidden. Dagim v'chagavim mutar la'achlan b'chalav. Fish and locusts you could eat with milk. Some commentaries bring down the prohibition of mixing fish and milk, but fish and cheese is certainly permitted. I mean, it's a Jewish staple, lox and cream cheese sandwich, It's got to be permitted. If somebody slaughters a chicken, a bird, and he finds completely ready eggs, mutar la'achlan b'chalav. Those eggs are not considered to be meat. They're not part of the chicken, and they can actually be eaten with milk. Now, the Rambam doesn't define what means a complete egg. And in the Shulchan Aruch, we find 5 opinions. It's a 5-way argument as to what stage an egg becomes fully ready. Does it have to have a full shell already? Not a shell, but the egg, the white and the yolk. I forgot the others, but there's a whole bunch of opinions.
It makes sense that it's
The-
a full egg shell with shell.
I mean, it has to be
According to him, I think it's the yolk and the
Yes.
abdomen has to be ready.
The Maggid Mishneh, the commentary on the Rambam, says that it's an egg that already has a yolk and a white. That's already separate, but it's still connected to the chicken's body. It hasn't fully separated off the body yet. It could even be still connected to the body. It's not considered meat. Halacha vav hama'ushan, smoked meat, v'hamavushal b'chamei Tveria, or something cooked in the hot springs of Tveria, v'chayetze behen, or things like them. Ein loiken alav. If you were to cook meat and milk in this fashion, smoke them together, cook them in the chamei Tveria together, you don't get lashes. V'chein hamavashal basar b'mei chalav. Same thing if you cook meat in whey, oy b'chalev mesa, or in the milk of a dead animal, even if it was slaughtered properly. We'll soon see this clearly. Oy b'chalev zachar, or in the milk of a male, and there's some argument as to what this means, a male human or a male animal. Oy shebishel dam b'chalav, or one cooks blood in milk. Blood is not meat. Potter, you're exempt. Were you to eat this mixture, you would not get lashes on account of eating basar b'chalav. You get other problems. You're eating blood, you're eating dead animal in certain cases, but not a problem of milk and meat. Aval hamavashel b'sar mesa, oy chelev v'chayetze bohen b'chalav. But if you were to cook dead meat, dead animal kosher meat, or forbidden fats, like we had in chapter 7, in milk, loika al bishula, you do get lashes for cooking it. That is considered meat with regard to basar b'chalav. Ve'eime loika al achilase mishum basar b'chalav, but you don't get lashes for eating this mixture because on account of basar b'chalav, because it's already forbidden on account of being a nevela or chelev. She'ein isur basar b'chalav chal al isur nevela isur chelev. We had this principle multiple times. One prohibition cannot take effect while the second prohibition is already in effect. The meat is forbidden for being dead animal. The meat is forbidden for being chelev. The prohibition of basar b'chalav cannot go and take effect on top of that. She'ein kan loy isur koilel, because there's no expanding scope of prohibition. V'loy isur meisif, nor are there more elements of the prohibition that are being expanded to. V'loy isur basachas, nor are there 2 prohibitions taking effect at the same time. Now, so the commentaries wonder that basar b'chalav does have an added element. It forbids the mixture also for benefit. But the commentators explain that's only because it's, or at least it sounds like from the Rambam elsewhere, it's an extension of the prohibition of eating. Since the prohibition of eating is not new, prohibition of benefit is also not considered new, and so you don't get lashes for eating basar b'chalav. Halacha zayin hamavashil shlil b'chalav. If somebody cooks an unborn fetus in milk, so you cut open the pregnant mother, you slaughtered it, there's a fetus, you take the fetus, cook it in milk. Chayav, you're liable. It's considered meat. And when you cook it in milk, it's a prohibition. V'cheina oichle, same if you eat it. Aval hamavashil shilya, but if you cook a placenta in milk, oy oir v'gidin v'atzamais, or you cook hide or sinews or bones, v'ikre karnayim utlafayim harakim, or the soft bottom portions of the horns or of the hoofs, b'chalav, cook any of those things in milk, potter, you're exempt. V'cheina oichlan potter, so too if you eat them, you're exempt. They're not considered to be meat.
So, but you're still over on the Mishneh Torah. That's still biblically forbidden. You just
The
don't
act is
get-
forbidden, you don't get punished.
You don't get punished for it.
Right.
It's kind of like Shabbos for you.
Potter aval aser.
Lafaim doesn't continue. Lafaim doesn't have some kind of meat on lafaim.
On the hooves?
Oh, you're talking about hoof.
מה זה טלפיים בעברית?
The regel.
The whole foot?
The from the knee down.
Oh, no. In halacha, tlafayim means just the hooves.
Okay.
So we've discussed the parameters of what's meat, what's milk, when the prohibition applies. Now let's talk about some cases that happen by mistake. And the question is, what do you do about them? Halacha ches. Basar shenafal l'soicha chalav, or chalav shenafal l'soicha basar, v'nizbashel imay. Meat falls into milk, or milk falls into meat and gets cooked together. So you have a pot of milk, a nice geschmack steak falls inside of it, or you're cooking up a whole bunch of meat over here, and there's little milk. I don't know if you can see it on the side here. The milk is falling into the meat. So what do? Says the Rambam, shi'urai b'noisin tam. The minimum measure to create a problem is if it gives a taste. That's the way we define it. Now, how do we know if it gives a taste? How do you know if there's enough meat in the milk mixture that it's giving taste transfer of the meat? You can't taste it. So what do? Says the Rambam, Ketzad, how do we do this? Chaticha shel basar shenafla ligdera retachas. Shel chalav, if you have a piece of meat, falls into a boiling pot of milk, and the word boiling is important, we're going to see later in the chapter, has to be hot. If two cold things mix together, there's not going to be taste transfer. So you have a hot boiling pot of milk, falls inside a piece of meat, toyem hanachri esakadera. You get a non-Jew to taste the mixture. Yeah. Im amar sheyesh batam basar asura. If he says in the milk that he can taste some meat, then the whole mixture is forbidden. That means that the taste of the meat transferred into the milk, and now you have meat and milk essentially cooking together. Forbidden. V'im lav muteras. If he says, I don't taste any meat in the milk, then it's permitted. Now, of course, v'oisa chaticha asura. The piece of meat which fell inside is forbidden. That's not a question. The question is whether the meat transferred taste to the milk. And in this case, if there's no taste of meat, the milk is permitted. But medvarim amurim, says the Rambam, when do we say that you can rely just on the non-Jew tasting? Shekodam v'hoitzi esachaticha koidem shetifloit chalav shabala. If you went right ahead and removed the piece of meat before it has a chance to exude any milk that it might have absorbed. Because the mechanism of this hot food goes as follows. When the meat falls into the milk, two things happen. First, the meat transfers some of its taste to the milk, maybe or not, depending on the guy's taste. But also, the milk enters the meat. So the meat now is carrying hot boiling milk. That causes the piece of meat to become forbidden on account of basar b'chalav. While it's still in the pot, the milk, the forbidden milk inside the meat, may then re-enter the milk. If there's a chance for that forbidden milk to have re-entered the permitted milk, now a non-Jew tasting is not going to help you, because you can't differentiate milk from milk. Milk is milk; it all tastes the same. Just that halachically, the part of it is forbidden, the part of it is permitted. So the Rambam says, when can you rely on the taste? If you took out the piece before it had a chance to exude the milk that it absorbed. But if you didn't remove the meat, which means that at this point there could have been some circular rotation of the milk, the kosher milk went into the meat, became forbidden, and came back out to the pot. Now we have to estimate on a ratio of 60-1. That means we cannot rely on a non-Jew tasting it. We just have to see how much milk is there relative to the piece of meat. Because the milk which was absorbed into the meat and became forbidden, came out again, got mixed with the rest of the milk. And so the only way to nullify it is to do the halachic nullification, which is 60-1. If there's 60 times the amount in the pot, then everything is nullified and it's all okay.
So it's all okay for the milk, not the meat.
Of course, the meat always remains forbidden. Yeah. Halacha test.
The Ramah,
Huh?
he says that we don't
just throw it away.
rely on the grain anymore.
Yes. The Ashkenazi custom, the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch says, we never rely on a non-Jew to taste. The initial step never happens. We never say, maybe there's a non-Jew, always go 60-1.
We don't trust the guy.
Yeah, we don't trust them. This halacha was all about meat falling into milk. Now we're going to go to the other case. Nafal chalav l'teich kdeira shel basar. Some milk falls into a pot of meat. And as the commentaries explain it, here the Rambam is referring to a case where the piece of meat onto which the milk fell is outside of the gravy, the liquid. This is a piece of meat that's isolated from the rest of the pot. There's an argument among the commentaries how isolated it is. Is it fully out of the gravy, or it's halfway in, halfway out? The Rambam seems to follow the first view, that it's fully out of the gravy.
Well, the top half.
Huh?
Say the top part of that piece of meat that it fell
That's Rashi's opinion. Yeah, Rashi says it's half in, half out, and the milk fell. Either way, the milk fell on the part of the meat that's outside of the gravy. That's this halacha here. Okay, so maybe this picture is not capturing it so accurately, but there's a whole bunch of meat in here, so much so that it's piling out of the liquid, and the milk fell into the meat. It's outside of the liquid. Says the Rambam, we need to have the non-Jew taste the piece of meat onto which the milk fell. Im ein batam chalav, if there's no taste of milk, hakol mutter, everything is permitted. V'im yesh b'chaticha tam chalav, if there's a taste of milk in the piece of meat, afal pi she'im tisachet hachaticha, lo yishar batam, even though, were you to squeeze out the piece of meat, no milk taste would remain, so technically in a certain way, the milk and meat haven't really mixed. Hoyil v'yesh ba'ata tam chalav, since right now there is a taste of milk in it, nesra oisachaticha, that meat becomes forbidden. Now, the moment that piece of meat becomes forbidden, we're treating it as a non-kosher piece of meat. This is called in halacha chanan, chaticha nases nevela. The piece of meat becomes like non-kosher meat. So essentially what happens now is, you have to look at this pot as a pot of kosher meat with a piece of non-kosher meat inside it. There could be taste transfer from this non-kosher piece of meat to the rest of the pot. So the Rambam says, once you've ascertained that this piece of meat becomes forbidden, now umisharin bekula. Now you have to estimate this piece of meat against the rest of the pot. Im haya bechol sheyesh bakdeira. If everything in the pot, and everything means everything, minachatichais, v'hayarak, v'hamarak, v'hatavlin, the rest of the pieces of meat, any vegetables inside it, the gravy, the spices, if everything combined against this non-kosher piece of meat is kedesha tia chaticha zu echad mishishin min hakol, there's enough that this piece of meat is 1 to 60 of the rest of the pot, hachaticha asura v'hasha'ar mutar. That piece of meat is forbidden, and the rest is permitted. So follow the case again.
60th or less.
Yes, the meat is outside of the gravy, milk has fallen onto it, we've ascertained that the meat has become forbidden, and the question is, does the meat then forbid the rest of the pot? If there's less than 60 times the piece of meat, the whole pot is forbidden. If there's more than 60 times the piece of meat, the whole pot is permitted. Now, says the Rambam, Bamed dvarim amurim, when do we say this law, that it's the two-step process? B'shaloi nieres hakdeira batchila keshenaf al hachalav. If you hadn't stirred the pot in the beginning when the milk fell in other words, you left the pot as is, so the milk only penetrated that piece that was outside of the gravy. You only made
If it's mixed with the gravy.
Oh, we'll see. So you only stirred the pot at the end. At the end means after the milk had time to penetrate the piece of meat. V'loi kisa, and you also didn't cover the pot, because covering could create a lot of steam in the pot and make the mixture a lot easier. Avalim nir mitchila v'ad soif. But if you were stirring the pot from the moment the milk fell in, from the beginning to the end, there's a big question here if the word va'ad soif is relevant according to the Rambam. If he means just stirring right in the beginning, or in other words, can you just get away with stirring it right away, or you have to actually stir it the whole time?
I understand ad sofa bishul.
Yeah, so the accepted interpretation is that the Rambam only means mitchila. That's the only important part, that you stirred it in the beginning. He writes
for a couple of seconds or
yeah,
a certain amount of time.
but not like the whole way through. Yeah. So if you stirred it in the beginning, oishe kisa mishas nefila ad soif, or you covered the pot immediately upon the milk falling in, and you left it covered in that state for a little bit, harei zeh b'noisen tam. Now, the entire pot becomes combined, and all you have to do is figure out if there's a taste of milk in the meat. In other words, there's no divided process here. It's not like the milk fell into a piece of meat outside the gravy, that meat becomes forbidden and now forbids the rest of the pot. No, because you stirred it, a non-Jew again. Because you stirred it, that means that the moment the milk fell in, it went into the entirety of the pot, not just this piece of meat. Hence, all we have to know is there a taste of milk in the whole pot? V'chein, similarly, im nafal chalav l'toich hamarak, oy l'chal hachatichos, if the milk fell not onto any piece of meat, it fell into the gravy, or it fell onto the mixture of pieces, v'loy noida le'ezu chaticha nafal, you don't know which piece it fell onto. Noyer es hakdeira kula, we're giving you a tip. Stir the pot, ad sheyashuv v'yisari v'akol, causing everything to mix. And this is a case where even if the meat was out of the gravy, but because you don't know which piece of meat it fell on, you're allowed to do this little mechanism here and let everything mix. This contradicts a basic principle in halacha which says you cannot you cannot nullify a prohibition initially. Here we're telling you to literally go, you don't know which piece of meat it fell on, mix it all in. But the commentaries say, since there was no prohibition that was definitely established, because you don't know which piece of meat it fell on, therefore you can use this mechanism. And then, once everything is mixed, you go back to the default question, Im yesh bakteira kula, tam chalav asura. If the entirety of the pot has a taste of milk, it's forbidden. V'im lav mutaras, if not, it's permitted. Im loy nimtza nachri shayitam v'nismei chalav. In general, if you don't have a goy, there's no goy around that can taste that and that you rely on him. You got to trust him. If there's no goy to trust him, misharim b'shishim. Then we just go back to the 60-to-1 ratio. That's a fallback option. You always use that. Bein basar l'teich chalav, bein chalav l'teich basar. If it's meat into milk, milk into meat, always the same principle. Echad mishishim mutar, pachas mishishim asar. 1 to 60 is permitted. Less than 60 is forbidden. Halacha Yud Aleph. K'dei shabishal babasar lo yevashal b'chalav. Any pot that you use to cook a meat dish, you cannot cook a milk dish in it. V'im bishel b'nei sein tam. If you did cook it, then you have to check the taste, because when you cook meat in it, some of the meat was absorbed into the walls of the pot. Now you're cooking milk in it, some of those absorptions may have come back into the milk. So you have to have a guy taste it and see if it gives taste. This one line here turns into a huge discussion in halacha practically. What does that mean? What happens if you did? If 24 hours passed between the milk and the meat cooking? It's a lot more rules than this one line, but this is the basic principle. Halacha Yud Beis Hakal Osur Midivrei Sofrim. The udder of a cow. This is interesting. The udder of a cow seems to be...
What is the other?
The udder is
Meat and milk.
where the milk comes out of. What do you call it?
Yeah, the other.
The udder.
The udder.
Yeah. What? Teat. Yeah. It's forbidden rabbinically. Why? Because it itself is a mixture of meat and milk. Right? There's milk in the udder, and the udder itself is meat. Now, the reason why it's only forbidden rabbinically is because she'ein basar shenizbashel b'chalev shchuta asur min haTorah. If you cook meat in milk of a dead animal, even if it was slaughtered properly, it's not forbidden biblically. By the way, of course, we're talking about a case where you cooked it. We don't just mean to eat it raw. We're saying you take the udder and you cook it. That's a prohibited cooking rabbinically, because it would be cooking meat in a dead animal's milk. Commissioner Brown, as we explained. Lefichach, therefore, im kra'oi u'merach hachalav shabai. If you tore it open and you poured out, you emptied it of all the milk inside it, mutar litzloisei u'la'achloi. You're allowed to roast it and eat it, because we'll say that all the milk will drain out and there'll only be meat. V'im kra'oi shesi va'erev. If you tore it open widthwise and lengthwise, v'tochei ba'koisel, and you pressed it against the wall, ad sheloi nishar b'lachluchis chalav, till no moisture of milk remains, mutar levash lo'im habasar. According to the Rambam, you're allowed to literally cook the udder's meat with other meat. It's not considered a meat-milk problem, because you've completely emptied it. Huh? Well, today in Shulchan Aruch says we don't eat the udder at all, because we don't want to get into these problems. But according to the Rambam, if you pressed it out, you can eat it cook it with other meat. Ukol shaloi kra'oi, an udder which you did not tear open, bein shal katana shaloi heinika, bein shal gedela, whether it's a young baby that never nursed, so there is no milk technically in the udder. Whether it's an adult animal, asur levashlo, you cannot cook it. V'im avaru bishlei, if you did transgress and cook it, bifnei atzmoi mutar la'achloi, if cooked it on its own, you can eat it. V'im bishlei in basar acher, if you cooked it with other meat, mishari noise b'shishim, you have to estimate it with 60, 1 to 60, ukchol min haminyan. But actually the meat of the udder itself can count towards the number of 60. In other words, you only really need 1 to 59, not 1 to 60. Ketzad, what does that mean? Practically, the Rambam describes it. Im haya hakoil, im akchal, kamei shishim bakchal. If the entire mixture, including the udder, was 60 against the udder itself, hakal asur v'hashar mutar, then just the udder is forbidden. That's where the mixture is happening. The rest is permitted. If it's less than 1 to 60 or 1 to 59, really, hakal asur, it's all forbidden. Ubein kach. Nevertheless, either way, im nafal likdeira acheres. If the udder, after it's been cooked with other meat, falls into another pot, oyser oysa, it forbids that second pot, umesharin by beshishim kibarishayna, and we estimate it against with a ratio of 60, like in the first pot. And now it's worse. Because at this point, when the udder has been cooked, it becomes like a forbidden piece of meat. because now there's meat and milk inside it that have been cooked together. And therefore, it requires 60 in the second pot as well. And we estimate it against the size of the udder as it was when it was cooked, not the size that it was when it fell into the second pot. You go to the original size, and that's how you measure 1 to 60. Even when you're allowed to roast an udder, when you cut it open, you cannot roast it above meat on a spit. It can't be higher because then it will drain into the meat. After the fact, if you did so, it is permitted, because we're going to say the milk will drain off, or that there was no milk left once you cut it open, but ideally, you shouldn't do that. Halacha tezvav keva shabishla b'chalav sheba. If you cooked an animal's stomach with the milk inside it.
That's fine.
So a young goat nursed from its mother, and you kill it right after a nursing session, and you take the stomach and you cook it with the milk inside it. And I'm told, I did some research, I told this is actually a very fancy cheese. Today, people do this. Fancy cheese. This is called, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Callu de Calbrettu, something like that.
Italian or something.
Italian cheese. You basically, this is the actual stomach of a young,
Actual stuff.
yeah, it's a stomach.
Milk's in there.
The milk is in there, and they tie it, and you hang it, and then it becomes a cheese, and it's very, very fancy, because in the stomach lining, and we'll soon see about this, in the stomach lining there's the enzymes that are required to curdle the cheese.
Right.
So it's a very fancy dish. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's spelled Callu.
Kosher.
Huh?
I mean, if the animal was shechted kosher, it's kosher, right?
So no, this would not be, because this is the stomach is meaty. It has elements of meat in the cheese. So here we're not talking about this I just showed you for fun. They're talking about where you actually cook this mixture. You take the stomach with the cheese and you cook it together. You cook it together, muteres, that's permitted. She'enei chalav, because it's not milk. Ela hareu kitinoifes. According to the Rambam, once milk enters an animal's digestive system, it becomes considered like waste. Sharei ishtana b'me'ayim, because it will be changed in the stomach. The commentaries debate, is this even if it's fully clear, the milk, or only if it decayed a little bit and became congealed? The commentaries here say that Rambam means all kinds of milk.
We did it in a previous
The
chapter.
animal, huh?
We did it in a previous chapter about the milk in the stomach.
We mentioned it, yeah, and we're going to mention it again today. Yeah.
So it is mutter then. It's not.
So what did I say? It's forbidden. No, it's permitted. It's permitted. I'm my mistake. So according to the Rambam, it's permitted. Now, according to other commentaries, it's not so simple. According to other commentaries, if the milk is clear, then it's actually considered to be milk.
But you
And if you cook it, then it's, no, you have to check it.
Well, in this case, the whole stomach's...
But they tie it up.
You can't let the milk go out.
I know, but you can see it first. I know, but you can see it though.
Open it up, I guess.
You can open it and you can see if it's clear or congealed. Yeah. So it's, yeah, so I'm sorry. So according to the Rambam, it's permitted, not,
Considered waste, really.
yes, the milk is not treated as milk. That's the bottom line. Now, talking about the stomach of an animal, says the Rambam, Malacha Tazayin, Asur lahamid hagvina ba'oir hakeva shel shchuta. You cannot curdle cheese using the skin of the stomach lining of an animal that was slaughtered. Again, it has that enzyme, it has rennet in it, and if you think about it, you're taking this piece of meat and you're putting it into the milk to make it cheese. That's forbidden. V'im hamid, if you did use it to start the cheese, toye mesagvina, you must taste the cheese, or a goy must taste the cheese. Im yesh batam basar, if there's a taste of meat in it, asura, it's forbidden. V'im lav, if there's no taste of meat, mutares, it's permitted. Because the Rambam here is explaining the underlying reasoning of this permission. We're going to see in chapter 15, when something is used to start as a catalyst for a big result, a starter for cheese, for example, we don't care how much cheese there is. If the starter subject is forbidden, because it's so integral to the mixture, it never becomes nullified. Not 1 to 60, 1 to 100, 1 to 200, doesn't matter. So here, why would it be permitted? Even if there's no taste of meat, we should say, since you used meat to start the cheese, no matter how small it is, it should never be nullified. Says the Rambam, no. If you think about it, essentially, the starter enzyme is kosher. It's not like you're taking a non-kosher stomach and putting it into the cheese. It's a kosher stomach, kosher meat of an animal. It's permitted. Because it's, after all, the stomach lining of a slaughtered animal. So the only prohibition here is a prohibition of milk and meat. And the prohibition of milk and meat, sheshiure b'neisen tam, its requisite amount is always whether taste transfers or not. Aval, but indeed, hamamid ba'er kevas nevelo treifa, were you to have used an enzyme from the stomach lining of a non-kosher animal, nevela, a dead kosher animal, or a mortally wounded kosher animal, ubehema tmeo, or a non-kosher animal, hoyil v'hamayim midavara asr bifnei atzmai, since the enzyme that you're using as a starter is itself inherently forbidden, nesra hagvina mishum nevela, the whole cheese is forbidden on account of non-kosher meat, le mishum basar b'chalav, not because of milk and meat, it's just simply not kosher, or it's carcass meat. For this exact reason, this is why the sages forbade us to eat cheeses that are made by non-Jews, because we're worried they're going to use the enzyme from the stomach of a non-kosher or a dead animal. But if it's kosher, as long as there's no taste transfer, it's permitted. Says the Rambam Malacha Yud Zayin, a general and very important principle. Habasar levadei mutter, v'hachalav levadei mutter. Understand that meat itself is permitted, milk itself is permitted. It's only when the two mix through cooking that they both become forbidden. And here we are introducing a concept that's called, where's my mouse here? Tata gavar. Tata gavar means when two substances mix, the lower substance overpowers. So, hence the Rambam says, when do we say that the cooking will forbid the milk and the meat? If both of them are cooked together, or hot meat falls into hot milk, or vice versa, it's hot into hot, or cold falls into hot. Cold milk falls into hot meat, because the hot meat's on the bottom overpowers, or the cold meat falls into hot milk, in which case the hot milk will overpower. But if one of them falls in hot into a pot of cold of the other substance, all you have to do is let's use the case of meat falling into milk. Hot meat falls into cold milk. Okay, where's my picture? Let's go back to this one. Okay, this piece is hot, the milk is cold. In the original case, the milk was hot. If the milk is cold, so the milk being the lower substance overpowers, and it says the halacha is koilef habasar kula shenaga be'achalav. All you have to do is peel the outer layer of the meat which touched the milk, and you can eat the rest. Because since the bottom substance is cold, it's going to cool off the meat. While it's cooling it off, a little bit of the milk will be absorbed into the meat, not a lot. Only it's called kidei klipa, enough of a layer of peel. You peel that off, and you can eat the rest. If they're both cold salami falls into cold cheese. All you have to do is wash it off. Wash it off, and you can eat it. Therefore, it's permitted to tie meat and cheese in one cloth. So long as they don't touch each other, then it's permitted. Even if they did touch each other and they're cold, wash the milk, the cheese, wash the meat, and eat them. If a food is salted, so salty that it cannot be eaten, it has the halachic status of boiling food. Therefore, let's say, if you have a piece of meat that's super salted, it's in the middle of being salted for kosher reasons, let's say, so it's so salty it cannot be eaten, and milk would fall into that meat, that's like milk falling onto hot meat. And whatever laws would apply over here. But if the salty food could be eaten as is, like the kutach mixture, in Talmudic times they had this dip that was made out of moldy bread and milk and salt, and it was very salty, but it could be eaten. It doesn't have the status of hot food, and something else falling into it cold is not going to be treated as boiling. Halacha yotes oif shachut shenafal lechalav. If you have a dead bird, a bird was slaughtered. Oh, Shulchan Aruch's coming out. Consulting the books. If you have a dead bird, this was a case that actually happened in the Talmud, discussed at length. Oif shachut shenafal lechalav. A slaughtered bird fell into milk, or into a kutach mixture, that's the dip, moldy bread and salt and milk. It has milk in it. So what do we do? Is this considered to be a cooking of milk and meat? The kutach is salty.
Depends.
Salted could be considered heat. So let's see. Says the Rambam, im chayhu, if the bird was raw, medicha mutar. You have to wash it off and it's permitted. Because since the kutach could be eaten as is, it's not considered to be hot. So it's like cold falling into cold. When cold and cold mix, you only have to wash it off. Be'im tzali, but if the bird was roasted, koilfai, you have to peel it. Because now the fact that it's been roasted gives it a heated status. It's like hot falling into cold. When hot falls into cold, even though the cold's going to overpower, but it will penetrate a little bit, and you have to peel the outer layer. Be'im hoyu by plachim. But if there were cracks in the bird, in the meat of the bird, kind of openings, or it was spiced with some spicy spices, and in that state it falls into the milk or into the kutach mixture, as a matter of fact, it becomes totally forbidden. These openings and these spices cause the absorption of the milk to a much deeper level, and the entire meat becomes forbidden.
And then some people say, I think, even if it's raw.
Yes, there's an argument here. Does this apply even if it's raw? Once it has cracks or spices, that could be even if it's raw meat. That's an argument among the commentators in the Shulchan Aruch. Halacha chaf. Asr lahalis ha'oif magvina ala shulchan she'o eichel alav. It's forbidden to have chicken and cheese on the same table when you're eating. Gzeira mishum hergel avera, that's a decree. It could lead to doing a sin. Shema yeichal zeim zeh. Perhaps you're going to eat one with the other. And we use the word chicken purposely. Afal pisha oif bechalav asr midivrei seifrim. Even though chicken and milk is only forbidden rabbinically. Still, stay away from it. If you have two guests and they don't know each other, they can eat on the same table. One milk and one or cheese and one meat of an animal. Because this one is not familiar with that guy, they're not going to share food. Which implies that if they do have a familiarity, you can't really eat on the same table.
But he doesn't mention here the idea
of a hecker. Yes. Shulchan Aruch says that if you're eating milk and meat, you can, as long as you have some kind of separation on the table, then it's okay. The Rambam doesn't mention that. He says it's totally forbidden. Halacha chav beis ein lashina isa b'chalav. We're not allowed to knead a dough with milk. You can't make bread with milk. V'im lash kala pas asura. If you did, the whole bread is forbidden. Mipnei hergel avera. We're worried about you're going to come to a sin. Shema yechal babasar. Perhaps you're going to eat meat with this bread. For the same reason. Well, we'll see. There's a way out of it in a second. Ve'ein tashin es ataner ba'alya. We don't coat an oven with the fat of the tail of an animal. V'im tash, if you did coat it, kol apas asura, any bread that you bake in the oven will be forbidden ad sheyasek es ataner, until you reheat the oven and all that fat goes away. Shema yechal b'chalav, otherwise we're worried you're having a fleshik piece of bread and you're going to eat it with milk. Bread must be made parav. It must be made not milk or meaty. V'im shina b'tzuras hapas ad shetia nikeres, but if you made a different shape of the bread, this is the way out of it, till it's clear. So you won't eat with it, not meat or milk, in whatever case it is. In other words, the round loaves are the dairy ones, and the square loaves are the meat ones, or whatever it is. Then then it's permitted. In fact, I hear that in Israel, barekas, they have different shapes for different ones. Apparently here it's not the same, but in Israel they have certain, dairy ones are certain shapes. The potato ones are square, the triangle ones are dairy. So they do it for a similar reason. Just it's more for people to know than for this halacha, but just the concept of you have to be aware the shape could indicate if it's milk or meat. Chav gimel, pas sha'afa imatzli. If you baked bread with roast meat, v'dagim shetzla nim abasar. If you baked or roasted fish with meat, asr la'achlan b'chalav. You cannot eat those other things, even though they're part of the bread and the fish. You can't eat it with milk. Kaira sha'achlu b'basar ubishlu b'dagim. If you have a bowl which you ate meat and then cooked in it fish, oisan hadagim muter la'achlan b'kutach. Those fish can be eaten directly with milky foods. It's called nat bar nat in halacha. Notein tam bar notein tam. Taste transfer, the son of taste transfer. When you had the meat in the pot, that's when the meat gave absorptions to the pot. Then you cooked fish, the meat absorptions came into the fish, and now you're eating the fish with the milk. It's a second stage, twice removed. So therefore it's okay.
That's even if you cooked the fish?
Huh? Yeah. Ubishlu badagim, that's what it says. Chav dalid sakin shechatach babasar tzli. If you have a knife that you use to cut roast meat, V'chazar v'chatach batznoin v'chayetze bei midvarim charifim. And then you went ahead and used the same knife to cut a radish or something pungent, which will extract taste. Asur la'achlan bekutach. Those radishes cannot be eaten with milky foods because of their pungentness, their sharpness, they're going to bring the meat taste into it, and it literally has meat. Aval im chatach babasar. But if you first cut meat with the knife, the chazar v'chatach bakishus ayavatiach, and then you cut some zucchini or watermelon. These two pictures over here, the knife was used for zucchini or for watermelon. Goyred mikayim achatach ba'oichel ashar b'chalav. All you have to do is scrape off the area of the cut, and you can eat the rest with milk because since it's not pungent, it doesn't draw out the meat. Chaf hey ein manichin kad shel melach b'tzad kad shel kamach. You cannot put a jar of salt near a jar of kamach. Kamach is another name for kutach, that milky mixture. Because the salt will draw out the flavor from the milky mixture. Then you might use that salt to cook meat with it, but it has the taste of milk in it. But you can put a jar of vinegar next to a jar of kutach, because the vinegar will not draw from the kutach. Chavav. Now we have the famous halacha of waiting between milk and meat. Misha achal gvina eichalav tchila. If somebody eats cheese or milk to begin with, muter lechal acharav basar miyad. The Rambam says it's permitted to eat meat right afterwards. B'tzarech sheyadiach yadav, as long as you wash your hands, v'yikaneach piv ben agvino ben abasar, and you wash out your mouth or you clean out your mouth between the cheese and the meat.
So the half an hour.
Hold on. Uvameh mekaneach piv.
Cheese or yellow cheese.
Huh?
They're different. Hard
Yeah.
cheeses are different.
Uvameh mekaneach piv. What do you use to clean out your mouth? Bepas or beperes. You have to actually eat bread or fruit, shaloyasan uboilan or pelton, which you chew them, swallow them, or spit them out. Uvakol mekanchin esapeh. You can use anything to clean your mouth out. Chutz mitmarim mekemach or yirakos. Besides for dates, flour, or vegetables. She'ein elu mekanchin yafa. Those don't clean out very well. Now, that is from milk or cheese to proper meat. We're talking about animal or beast meat. But if you want to eat chicken after milk or cheese, doesn't require washing out the mouth or washing your hands. From milk to chicken, it's totally okay, you go right away. Now, this is the Rambam's opinion. Today it's commonly accepted to wait, actually, between milk and meat. The custom is an hour, some wait a half an hour. There's some different sources, but the point is that you have to actually wait some time between the milk and the meat. There is also an opinion that after eating hard cheese, you have to wait 6 hours, and we'll soon see why that is. Says the Rambam Halacha Chavches, final halacha. Misha achal basar batchila. If somebody ate meat first, bein basar behema, bein basar oif, whether it's meat of an animal or meat of a bird, chicken, lo yoichal acharav chalav. You cannot eat milk afterwards, ad sheyiyeh beineyan kedei shir suda acheres, till you wait, or till there is between them the amount of a full meal. In other words, the amount of time that you should wait till you eat your next meal. Which is about 6 hours. And the Rambam gives a reason. Because the meat that gets into your teeth does not go out with a typical cleansing of the mouth. You have to wait 6 hours till all that stuff will be removed and will lose its power. So since the meat gets stuck in your teeth, you have to wait 6 hours. Based on this, some say when you have hard cheese, which also stays, you have to also wait 6 hours. There's another reason why we wait 6 hours for meat, because of the taste, not because of the actual meat, because of the taste that remains in your mouth. That's more relevant to the hard cheese, because the hard cheese is, yes, it's more about the taste, and it stays inside. So, nevertheless, from meat, so here you have it on the screen, right? So if you ate milk at 11 o'clock, you eat meat at 12 o'clock. If you ate meat at 2 o'clock, you eat milk only at 8 o'clock. That's why on Shabbos you have to be careful when you eat cholent to keep track of when you ate the cholent, because only 6 hours later you can have your pizza. So this is the final halacha about mixing milk and meat, that we go so far as to wait between eating them so we don't come to mixing them even in our mouths.